Halfway through Can't Help Falling in Love, Elvis saw a man in uniform rise from the crowd. His medals caught the spotlight. The king stopped mid-verse. 12,000 people froze. The veteran's lips trembled as he began to speak. Stories like this prove music can heal wounds. Words can't. Stay with me. Because what Elvis did next wasn't in the set list, and it left an entire arena in stunned, tearful silence. The horns were still blaring when Elvis froze. 1 foot forward. Mic raised. Eyes locked on someone in the third row. The band kept playing for half a second until he flicked his wrist. The music bled into silence. Mid-70s. Las Vegas showroom. Seats filled wall to wall. Spotlights slicing through a haze of cigarette smoke. The crowd had been electric seconds ago. Swaying. Clapping. Half rising from their plush red chairs. Elvis stood center stage in his white jumpsuit, collar open. Rhinestones throwing sparks under the lights. Sweat traced down his temple. The air smelled of cologne. Warm stage lights and stale bourbon from the bar. And then, in the middle of Can't Help Falling in Love, his gaze locked on a man who wasn't swaying or smiling. Row 3. Center section. A man in a dark blue dress uniform, jacket pressed so sharply it could cut glass. Rows of ribbons glinted under the spotlight. His posture rigid, almost military parade rest, was out of place in a crowd, leaning forward, waiting for the next note. People beside him shifted, giving him space, sensing this moment was suddenly about him. Some in the audience recall seeing Elvis narrow his eyes, like he was trying to place the man's face. Witnesses say that's when he gave the smallest wave to the band, barely a flick of his left hand, and the entire orchestra dropped into a hush. The sudden quiet felt like someone had pulled the air out of the room. All that was left was the faint hum of the amps, the distant clink of ice in a glass at the back of the room, and the sound of a woman near the aisle whispering, "That's a soldier." The veteran's eyes met Elvis's. He didn't move, didn't smile, just stood slowly, like the weight on his shoulders had nothing to do with gravity. Elvis took 1 step forward, then another. The spotlight followed. The brass section sat motionless behind him, horns in laps watching. In that silence, the moment stretched. No music, no laughter, just 12,000 people and 2 men staring at each other across the edge of a stage. No one knew yet why the man was standing. No one knew why Elvis had stopped the show, but something about the way the king's jaw tightens said this was about to turn into a story the crowd would tell for the rest of their lives. Elvis reached the edge of the stage, pointed directly at the man in uniform and said clear enough for the front rows to hear, "Sir, would you come here?" Gasps rippled through the room. Security glanced toward the stage, unsure. Elvis didn't move his gaze from the man in row 3. His voice carried steady, respectful. "Come on up here, sir." 2 ushers stepped into the aisle. For a split second it looked like they might guide the man out, but then one nodded toward the stage, clearing the way forward. The man began walking, slow, each step measured. The cane in his right hand tapped against the carpet in a steady rhythm. His left arm stayed close to his side, the sleeve of his uniform pulling slightly at the seam. The spotlight followed him. People leaned into the aisle to watch. A woman near the front clasped her hands under her chin. As he neared the steps, Elvis stepped down from the stage so they met on even ground. Witnesses say Elvis's knees bent slightly, lowering himself just enough so their eyes met level. "Tell me your name, sir," Elvis said into the mic. The man took off his cap, revealing a tight crop of silver hair. A faint click echoed as the medals on his chest brushed the mic stand. Audience still silent, except for one cough from the balcony. According to several people who were there, the man had recently returned from Vietnam. His uniform was immaculate, but his face showed deep lines and eyes that had seen more than most could imagine. "My name's Robert," he said, his voice catching halfway through. Elvis's expression softened instantly. He reached out, resting one hand on Robert's shoulder, his thumb brushing the fabric near the highest ribbon. "What brings you here tonight, Robert?" Robert glanced toward the crowd, as if searching for the right to speak, then looked back at Elvis. "I came to thank you," he said. The words hung there. Thank him for what? Robert's grip on the cane tightened. He drew a slow breath, and the faintest tremor ran through his fingers. Robert explained that during a long night in the jungle, cut off from support, his squad had stayed awake by softly singing one of Elvis's songs. That song kept their minds sharp and may have kept them alive. But he didn't say which song. Not yet. The crowd seemed to lean in as one. You could hear the faint buzz of the amplifiers, the soft rustle of someone shifting in their seat. Elvis glanced at the audience, then back at Robert. "I think everyone here should hear that story." The spotlight tightened. Robert's eyes dropped for a moment. His voice lowered. He began to speak, the first details spilling out. Dense jungle, enemy footsteps, the whisper of a song in the dark. And that's when Elvis's eyes began to glisten. Elvis turned slightly toward the band, raising 2 fingers. The drummer gave a soft tap, and the orchestra eased into a slow, low swell, just enough to cradle the man's voice without drowning it. Robert's hand stayed wrapped around the mic stand like it was the only thing anchoring him to the moment. His eyes weren't on the crowd anymore. They were somewhere far away. "It was late," he began, "and we were cut off." The gentle chords rolled under his words. 8 of us, hiding in thick brush. The air was so heavy it felt like breathing water. A bead of sweat slid from his temple, catching in the crease beside his mouth. In the crowd, someone shifted, the seat creaking in the stillness. The faint hiss from the speakers made it feel like the whole room was leaning forward to hear. Robert explained that they'd been awake for nearly 2 days, eyes burning, nerves frayed. Then they heard footsteps, not theirs, slow, careful, getting closer. One soldier began to hum under his breath, "Just keep calm." According to Robert, the tune was "Love Me Tender," quiet enough that only their small circle could hear it. "We all joined in," he said, soft, slow, just enough to steady our breathing. The music from the band matched his pace now, each note hanging in the air like a heartbeat. Robert's voice lowered further. That's when we heard it. Just ahead, a branch snap, a whisper, not ours. The soft humming stopped. Everyone froze. One of the men, still alert because of that humming, spotted movement in the dark, figures edging around their flank. It gave them seconds to react. "That saved us," Robert said, his hand tightening on the mic. "All 8 of us made it through the night because of that song." Elvis's eyes stayed locked on Robert, the spotlight catching the moisture there. In the silence between chords, you could hear the faint tap of Robert's cane as he shifted his weight. Robert took a deep breath, as if weighing whether to say more. "Sir, I never thought I'd stand in front of you to tell you that." The crowd was still, like even the thought of applause might break the spell. Elvis leaned in just enough for the mic to catch his voice. "Then let's do something neither of us thought we'd do tonight," he said. He turned to the band and gave a single nod. The first soft notes of "Love Me Tender" filled the room slower than the record. Deeper, warmer. Elvis lowered himself onto the stage, patting the spot beside him. Robert hesitated, then stepped forward. Elvis held the mic between them and whispered, "Sing it with me." And in front of 12,000 people, the soldier who once sang to stay alive began to sing again. The first line came out shaky. Robert's voice wavered like he wasn't sure it would hold. Elvis didn't let the silence swallow it. He slid his voice underneath, steady and rich, carrying Robert through the notes. They were sitting on the lip of the stage now, Elvis cross-legged, mic between them, Robert standing just close enough that their shoulders almost. The lights dimmed to a soft amber glow, leaving only the 2 of them in sharp relief. The rest of the stage faded into shadow, the crowd just a dark ocean beyond the footlights. The low bass notes vibrated through the floor. The smell of warm stage lights, mixed with faint traces of perfume drifting up from the front rows. Flashbulbs popped in quick bursts, catching silver in Robert's hair and rhinestones on Elvis's jumpsuit. Halfway through the first stanza, Robert's voice cracked. For a split second it looked like he might stop, but Elvis leaned in closer, the mic tilting toward him, letting Robert rest on his harmony. The crowd, without any cue, began to sing along, softly at first, A ripple of voices moved from the front rows to the balcony. Elvis glanced sideways at Robert, a small smile tugging at his mouth. Robert didn't smile back. He was too focused, eyes glassy, lips moving carefully over every word. As they reached the final line of the stanza, Elvis took the scarf from around his neck and draped it over Robert's shoulders. He gave it a gentle tug to settle it in place, then leaned in and kissed Robert's cheek. The crowd erupted for the first time in minutes, applause breaking the fragile quiet, but only for a moment before it fell back to a hush. You could hear the soft slide of Elvis's boot on the stage floor as he shifted closer. The scarf's fringe brushed against Robert's chest metal. When the song ended, Elvis didn't turn back to the mic. Instead, he leaned in and whispered something only Robert could hear. Robert nodded slowly, gripping the scarf in one hand like it was the only thing keeping him steady. No one in the audience knew what Elvis had said. They only knew Robert's eyes were shining and his lips pressed together in a line that looked a lot like gratitude and pain. Elvis rose to his feet, pulling Robert gently up beside him. He turned toward the audience, eyes sweeping across the room as if deciding what to say next. "This man," Elvis said, voice deep and certain, "is the reason we sing." The crowd's cheer swelled, only to cut short when Elvis raised a hand for silence. The room was still. Elvis kept his hand raised until every last cheer faded. Then he stepped toward the mic and spoke like he was letting the audience in on a secret. "This man," Elvis said, motioning to Robert beside him, "is why we sing. This man is why we're free." The crowd erupted again, longer this time, more than applause. It was gratitude, wrapped in noise. Robert's chin dipped, eyes on the floor, overwhelmed. Stage lights burned warm against the white of Elvis's suit. The faint squeak of a mic cable shifting underfoot, the hum of the amps behind them. Elvis turned, signaling to someone in the wing. A stagehand appeared, carrying a black guitar case. The case was scuffed at the edges, latches dulled from years of use. The stagehand flipped it open. Inside, resting in red velvet lining, was a vintage Gibson acoustic. Elvis lifted it out carefully, holding it by the neck with one hand. He took a Sharpie from the stagehand and bent over the body of the guitar. The scratch of the marker on lacquer was sharp in the quiet. A few flashes went off from the front row, capturing the exact moment his name curved across the wood. Elvis stood upright, guitar in hand. He walked it over to Robert. No flourish, no theatrics, just held it out with both hands, like passing on something that mattered. Robert hesitated before taking it, fingers brushing the signature like he couldn't quite believe it was real. Witnesses say Robert's lips moved, but no sound came out. Elvis smiled and simply said, "It's yours." The applause came soft at first, then slowed, then stopped altogether. It wasn't awkward. It was reverence, an entire room letting the weight of the gesture sink in. According to Robert's family, a week later a package arrived at his home. Inside was a letter in Elvis's unmistakable hand. "You'll always have a seat in the front row. Your friend, E." 2 laminated passes lay beside it, marked life. Robert's daughter recalled opening the envelope and catching the faint scent of cologne lingering, even after the paper had been handled by the postman. The guitar never left their family home. It would end up behind glass, next to that letter and scarf, in the same room where Robert told his grandchildren the story again and in every retelling, he would pause before describing what Elvis whispered into his ear that night, because some things he said were just between the two of them. Decades later, in a quiet living room far from Las Vegas, Robert's son lifted the glass case from its stand. Inside, the guitar rested exactly as Elvis had handed it to his father that night. The son placed the case on the table, flipping the brass latches with the same care someone might handle a flag. The lid creaked open. The red velvet interior had faded to a softer hue, but Elvis's signature was still bold, black against the honey-colored wood. The faint scent of aged lacquer drifted out, mixed with something else, the trace of the cologne Robert had worn in his later years. Beside the guitar, folded neatly, was the scarf, decades old, yet the fringe still soft. Hanging on the wall above the display was the framed letter from Elvis. "You'll always have a seat in the front row. Your friend, E." The son ran his fingers over the glass.
He kept it where he could see it every day, he said. Robert had never been one to talk about the war in detail, but after that night, his family said something changed. He smiled more, laughed more, slept better. Dad always said, his son continued, that on that stage, for those few minutes, he wasn't a soldier, he was just a man being heard. And that's the moment kindness became louder than the music. The guitar, scarf, and letter have stayed in the family, displayed in their home. They've turned down every offer to sell them, not because of what they're worth, but because of what they mean. One night in a Las Vegas showroom, Elvis Presley didn't just give a song, he gave a man a piece of himself back. And in doing so, he gave a family a story they'd carry for generations. If this story moved you, share it with someone who believes kindness can stop a room. What's the most unforgettable act of compassion you've ever witnessed?